listening to Philly Who, the podcast that tells the stories of the doers, thinkers, and performers of Philadelphia. My name is Kevin Schmidlin, and today I'm speaking with social equity thought leader Erica Atwood. Erica played a key role in the campaign to elect Michael Nutter as mayor, and she would later serve as the director of black male engagement for the city of Philadelphia during his administration. Since then, Erica has been involved in Cities United, a national movement to eliminate inner-city violence, and she spent time as the interim executive director of the Philadelphia Police Advisory Commission. Today, she's the CEO of First Degree Consulting, LLC, which advises governments, nonprofits, and schools on how to create more equitable communities.
It's not always about telling someone they're right or wrong. It is about often making someone think a little bit differently about the position they take.
You'll hear about the lives touched by Erica's work and how she's been moved to be a part of their story.
He reminded me of that in that moment to say, I probably wouldn't be here if you hadn't told Brandon to take me everywhere so I could see something different. And so I wouldn't fall back into the traps that I'd been in since I was 12.
And we'll talk about the ways we can all work to bring about social equity and how we should all make an effort to expand our perspective.
We get really comfortable in our lane, and it gets really easy just to go this day to day and not realize I've spent the last 3 weeks in rooms with only people that look like me.
All this and more about Erica Atwood, her mission to bring community wherever she goes, and what it all means for Philadelphia, right now, here on Philly Who. I'm your host, Kevin Schmidlin, and stay tuned. Erica Atwood was born and raised in an extremely supportive community right across the river in Camden, New Jersey. And though she would attend Howard University and go on to receive a graphic design degree, she knew from a young age that her destiny was in serving communities and driving forward social justice.
It's really interesting because at 17, I would have told you I want to be a juvenile defense attorney. And I wanted to do something involved very much aligned with what I do now, just in a different path. I wanted to do social justice work before it had a name. Both of my parents were active in the NAACP in the 60s and the 70s. The YMCA was pretty much almost a country club for blacks in Camden, if that makes any sense. But it was a place where YMCA is a place where we've always been allowed. And so it was a gathering place, a meeting place. So I understood our history. I understood civil rights. I understood segregation. I understood racism at a very young age. I knew kids who went to jail. Like, I knew my friends' brothers went to jail. Like, there was a thing that was happening that was around that needed to be fixed. And that was the only path that I saw. Like, I understood who Thurgood Marshall was. I understood that there was some injustices happening, and how do I do that? So that at 17, it was like, that was what I was good at. So like, while I was fumbling around at 18, 19, 20, I had a very much a more acute understanding of who I wanted to be when I was 17, which is really funny.
Right. So did you, at that time, actually go for that type of thing?
Oh, no.
Why not?
Being rebellious, I think. I think it was fear of failure. While not my first time away from home, my first time on my own. So I went to boarding school for high school. It was the idea was go through sociology program, become a social worker, go to law school, and then do the law school thing. I just found sociology at 18 extremely torturous and mundane.
Right.
Now I'm just like, oh, that's what they were trying to teach me. Now I understand. Now I'm ready. It's interesting because I would say if gap year was a thing, I should have taken a gap year as a kid if that was a thing. Then.
Well, it sounds like you still wound up on the trajectory that you, like you said, you knew you wanted to be on at 17.
Right. Because you can make plans. You can make all the plans in the world, but if your destiny and your purpose is your purpose.
Yep.
And you're going to end up there whether or not, no matter what route you try and take.
So when did you then get involved in the Nutter campaign?
It was really interesting. Kind of our first real conversation was he had pulled, I guess, a focus group together of folks to talk about, I can't remember what policy it is now, but there might have been 10 of us in the room. I took a friend with me, and we were all college educated. We were all had some level of privilege in the room, either based on where we came from or what we had built for ourselves. And I remember having this conversation around whatever the policy was. I get it. I support it. But how do we explain it to someone who didn't come out of Penn or who didn't come out of Howard? And how do we not make decisions for people, but with people? And that was kind of our very first conversation. And that had been the basis of our relationship for the years.
How did he respond to that, to you bringing up those points?
He thought it was he was really open and receptive, and he asked me questions. In his openness, it was what I found so striking, like not the exact words. I couldn't remember if I tried.
Sure.
But just how receptive he was to the conversation, which made me open up more and want to be supportive of wherever he was going to go.
So you build this relationship with Michael Nutter, and then he declares that he's running for mayor.
Yeah. So at the time I was working, so this is years later, at the time I was working at a financial firm, and I had still been volunteering here and there for the campaign. And I'd been asked to come on, kind of casually asked to come on. I said no. And you just kind of have this kind of sneaking, kind of deep sinking feeling like it wouldn't go away, like the question wouldn't go away. And so talked it over with some friends, and went back and saw whether or not the opportunity was still open. And I became his deputy finance director for the campaign. So I handled all of his fundraising events and all the outreach, community outreach that directly related to fundraising.
Yeah. What was the hesitation?
It was unsure. I had a good job. I had a good boss. I was making decent money. At the time, he had just declared, and he was 5th place in a 5-way race where he was the only one declared.
Wow.
So it was a risk. It was a huge risk. And culturally, like, we tend to be risk adverse. Like that's not it wasn't a sure win by a long shot at that point in time. There was a lot of criticism that I got from other people in the African American community about supporting him and not some of the other candidates that were sought to be or at least 2 of the other candidates who were sought to be kind of a shoo-in. So I was taking a huge risk.
Right. You were betting on the underdog.
Yeah. And I won.
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, the difference here, between that and just straight up betting on the underdog is that you actually participate in the race. You have a direct impact on, on the running and on the victory. So let's talk about that. You decide to join.
Yeah.
Then what do? What do they say? Hey, here's your job.
I mean, it's day in, day out going to talk to people and collect checks. Like, all types of different people. I got to go all over Philadelphia. I saw neighborhoods and things that I had not seen before. I didn't grow up here, so I would come here and visit for holidays, but being able to see Philadelphia in its true beauty as a patchwork quilt was really interesting to see. Because you see in political campaigns, I would honestly say that you see people at their truest in whether or not they show it to you on purpose or not. So that was one of the things that kind of just going from event to event, from campaign stop to campaign stop, to coordinating random trolley tours around the city to meet and greet folks. That was the type of work that I did on the campaign.
You, through campaigning, got a chance to see people at their truest. Mm-hmm. What's an example of someone being their truest with you?
They're the North Philly Stompers. There's this beautiful, wonderful spirit, Miss Helen, who is kind of an elder in the community. I think I'm getting her name right. I think it's Miss Helen, but I remember her face. And I remember going to visit her and getting almost her permission for us to come into the neighborhood. She was a gatekeeper in a good way, in the sense of you can only come here if you intend to do no harm. And in talking to her and sitting in her house and just having a conversation with her and taking that time, and then coming back to that community for a block party. Because essentially we were asking permission to come back and bring the candidate back. And coming back and bringing him back and hanging out in the neighborhood. And it was interesting because you hear mutterings on the street. Well, when he get here, I don't know. I'm not messing with him. And so you get all of that. And then when he gets there, you see folks pull out their camera phones. You see folks come and hug him. That you also see him open up in a way people didn't think was possible, because he comes across one way on a screen and in an interview, but when you get him kind of one-on-one, you see how open and how loving he can be to each and every individual that comes and approaches him, how open he is. Again, why I supported him in the first place, how open he is to listen, how open he is to people. And that was a part that I really loved about, or that behind the veil moment, and spending that time at that block party in North Philly.
So Mayor Nutter gets elected.
Yep.
He invites you to be a part of his administration.
Yeah. One of the things that has always been important to me, like even though I was doing the fun stuff, even though I was doing the ceremonial stuff, there was always a current or an undercurrent of social justice work, or giving back or civic engagement. I'd always done that. And so out of college, even while I was working, I was teaching art classes at an after school program. I got the opportunity to go to the Urban League conference when it was here in the late 90s. And so from there, I joined Urban League Young Professionals. So I was always volunteering, always giving back, always doing something. And so even while I was doing all this great stuff, kind of in the arc of what you see, there were still the roots of kind of civic engagement that existed for me. And so when I got into the city rep's office, it was aligned with the arc and what everybody saw, but it wasn't as aligned with the roots and the core and where I come from and what was important to me. And so spent 2 years there, got to do some amazing things there. So I was there the year the Phillies won the World Series. So got to work on the World Series parade, got to do even a parade for some young people who had won the Pop Warner League nationally. And so the North Philly Blackhawks got to do the parade for them, which was more enjoyable for me than
the Phillies parade?
Than the Phillies parade.
The Phillies parade was pretty intense.
That was a thing. That was a whole thing.
To say the least.
No regrets, but it was a thing.
Yeah.
So like, and it goes back to something we were talking about earlier around the masses versus the individual. And I say that I enjoyed, while the whole city won when the Phillies won. You saw everybody coming out to see what it felt like for those young boys and the young women who were on the cheerleading squad to be on these buses going into their neighborhood, to be celebrated, to have a brass band, to have the Eagles come out and support them. Like, to see that happen and to see the pride that they took in their winning still means a lot. Like, I remember even the mayor sending those of us who worked on it, myself, Jordan Schwartz and Tumar Alexander, like we all worked on this together, and the mayor sending us a little note, and like, that's one of the notes that it's probably somewhere in a box still that I printed out, and like just saying thank you today was great. Like, that's essentially what the note said, but that meant a lot. And you don't know what those moments mean to people and how it may be a trajectory point for them to something great.
Right, because the Phillies know that Philly's behind them, but when these kids see all these people coming to see them on the bus, they can see their city, that they have their back. Wow. So you serve as a representative of the city, and the city representative, is that what you said?
City representative. Yep. I was deputy city representative.
And then your role then evolved, and then you became the director of Black male engagement. So again, you mentioned that it was more of an undertow, this sort of focus. Was there a time when you said, you know what, it's time for this to be my professional focus? Or was it another one of those things where you just kind of woke up one day and you're like, oh my gosh, here I am?
That was, I mean, I'd known it for a while, and that was part of the reason why I moved over to the mayor's office. That was one of the things that I asked for. I can't remember. No, it had to be Clay. Clay Armbruster was chief of staff at the time, and just kind of asking for something different, something more. That there was a gap there within the mayor's office in terms of who is really handling that outreach, who's really kind of the face or the voice of the community kind of inside City Hall, who's opening the door. And that's one of the things that was part of my job too, is like, it's not only going out and taking us out, it's inviting people in. And so I would do, working on our violence reduction efforts, we were focusing on the 22nd Police District. So I held a dinner with all the community leaders that we could identify from the 22nd Police District to just talk to them about what our plan was and get their support. Because you need trusted messengers on the ground. You can't make decisions for community without talking to them and without them kind of giving you the okay. Again, back to sitting in Miss Helen's living room. It's like, I can't come in your hood and tell you what I'm supposed to do if I'm unwilling to talk to you. And so that's always been a tenet of how I operate. And it still is. It's absolutely like, I'm not going to make decisions, and no one should feel comfortable making decisions for communities without having a conversation with them first.
Yeah. So in your time as the director of Black male engagement, was there anything that stands out to you where you particularly were moved by the impact of the work you were doing?
Funny. It's actually something that happened recently.
Okay.
Post being in city government. I live in West Philly, University City. And I live on this really small block, like Philly does have, where there was some construction work going on the in a house across the street from me. And I'm leaving to go meet someone for lunch. I guess this had to be this year. It was the beginning of this year. And I turn my corner, and there's this guy covered in dust, because you can tell they're doing a clean out. So he's covered in dust. I can't see his face. He's got like one of those protection mouth face mask on the top of his goggles, like, so, and again, covered in dust, can't see his face at all. He's like, Miss Erica. Oh, hello. Hi, sweetie, how are you? I have no idea who this is. I cannot see nothing. So I'm like, he wipes the dust off his face, he gets closer. I'm like, oh, Jamal. And it is this kid who used to work for Cure Violence. I'd met him when he was maybe 24, so he has to be maybe 28 now. And he had spent, since the age of 12 to the time that I met him, in and out of detention. And I saw something in him, like you just see that, you see a hunger in young people sometimes, like regardless of the trajectory, the path, all the stuff that they've been through, you can absolutely see a light if you're willing to look. If you're willing to see their humanity, you can see a light in them. And I saw a light in Jamal. And I said to a street worker, Brandon, that he was with, I was like, take him everywhere. Like, if I see you, I need to see him. Like, no questions asked. Like, make sure he's with you at all times. I don't remember saying this at all. And he reminded me of that in that moment at the corner of my block, to say, I probably wouldn't be here if you hadn't told Brandon to take me everywhere so I could see something different. And so I wouldn't fall back into the traps that I'd been in since I was 12.
How did you feel when he told you that?
I damn near cried my entire walk to my lunch. I sat with the person I was having lunch with and told her the story. I'm like even getting misty here thinking about it, because it's seeing people. It's all about seeing someone. and not looking through them and not looking past them. And I often feel like this work, and when I say this work, I mean work in government. We often don't, we're getting to a point where it's becoming popular. It's becoming something people do. And it's not necessarily driven always, it feels like, by passion and by purpose. And when you just want to be director of this and specialist of that, or elected to the other, and you lose sight of the people that you truly are there to serve, then something is missing. And I just hope we can get back to, or get to, in the first place, the altruism that should come with public service.
What advice would you have for somebody who's just getting into public service?
Spend time with people. Like, that's it. Like, go to community meetings. Volunteer in the neighborhood you serve. I remember when we started the campaign, and I mean, I'm friends with some of these folks still to the day, but a lot of them hadn't seen some of the most vulnerable neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And I'm like, you can't tell me what's going to work in this neighborhood if you haven't seen it. Like, just take a day drive. Like, just drive by and see what the daily life looks like for folks. That's it. Good, bad, indifferent. Like, just see it.
So now you're back to being full-time in your consulting firm.
Yes.
What so far is the major difference for you? Because it's, you're still doing social justice work. What's the major difference, working as a representative of the city and now sort of working more independently?
I thought you were going to go another way with that, but I'll take the high road.
I mean, I'm intrigued.
I was like, the major difference is that sometimes I get to work in my pajamas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I gotta imagine that's nice.
That's nice. No. So it's about an inside-outside game, and so public service for me is about breaking a system that doesn't work, or making a system that could work more efficient. And you can do that by getting into the mechanism and removing cogs and replacing them and cleaning stuff out and from the inside of a mechanism. And then sometimes from the outside, you can say, all right, well, I understand now how it works on the outside. Now let me do the stuff on the outside that'll make it go and make it work better.
So what types of, so are there certain types of things that almost have to be done from the outside? Or is it just a difference of how you do the same things?
I think it's both end. It's actually both end. Sometimes working inside can be your best education. And so understanding how policies are made, understanding how they're put into practice. There will be some folks that tell you policies don't work. I don't agree. I think policies absolutely do work if they're the right freaking policies. And you get to write, make, decide on, remove the right things from policies on the inside. You get to advocate for, yell about, research, study on the outside.
Bad policies don't work.
Bad policies don't work. Bad people making good policy don't work.
So with issues like these, a lot of people, for whatever reason, make a decision on how they feel, and that's it. They don't seem to really have a very open mind or want to learn or hear from anybody else. How do you approach that?
Listen.
Listen to them?
Yeah. Listen. And so I do a lot of traveling for consulting. Like, I'm on a plane tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to LA. Like, you meet a lot of people. And you meet a lot of people who don't understand who I am because they've never had an intimate conversation with a person of color before. You meet a lot of people who have never seen an urban area. So this is the best example I can say for this. And so I've sat at bars, and you can tell a person who's willing to listen and be heard based on when I tell them what I do, whether or not they shut down. If they say, well, what do you do? I said, I'm a consultant. What do you consult on? I consult on race and equity issues. Shut down, open up. Most people open up.
Oh.
Most people will say, oh, well, what does that mean? What does that entail? Tell me about that. So I'll tell them about a project that I work on. And so then you start to get folks talking about opinions, or we'll talk about something because there's always CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or something on in an airport. So we'll talk about what's on whatever the story is, whatever 45 has said. Like we're going to discuss that. And I listen, and then I ask questions. And so it's not always about telling someone they're right or wrong. It is about often making someone think a little bit differently about the position they take. And if you ask them the right questions, you'll get them to open up and think a little differently.
At the time of this recording, Philadelphia is coming off a bit of a time in the national spotlight when there was an incident at a Starbucks nearby. You were quoted in an article regarding that incident as saying, Philly is superficially progressive. We want to be better, but we are unwilling as a community to do the tough work in reconciliation of our past.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that more? What is the tough work that we have to do?
So we have to talk about racism, all of our isms, classism, because race and class, particularly in the city, in the way that it is developing, are very much intertwined. And we are a predominantly African-American city. We are a majority people of color city. And we are the poorest major city in the country. That is not by fault of the people who are burdened with poverty. We have to talk about the systems by which allowed them to get there. Part of that conversation is happening with cash bail now, because that is a hole that is dug deep. We have to talk about just justice reform by and large. We have to talk about education reform enormously. Like, if folks are moving into the city, if you and I weren't here and we moved here because of a job, we had kids, where would you put your kids in school? And so in thinking about the public school system, and you look at the magnet schools that exist and some of the amazing work that has been done in some of these other, some of the other schools, you look at Chris Lehman's work with SLA, like there are amazing reforms that are happening, but they're happening episodically, or they're happening at a slow pace that they can't serve all of the youth that are happening, or they're not getting the support they need, be it financial or other resources or infrastructure resources that they need. And so we have to begin to address that pipeline to failure. It's not just a pipeline to prison. It's a pipeline to failure that we have to stop gay right now. And if we're unwilling to talk about the systems that we work for, support, and make real reform in, then we're gonna keep doing this merry-go-round that digs into the ground, that continues to bury us.
For someone who comes from a place of privilege, does not have the perspective of folks that are in this pipeline to failure, but wants to help, it can be very overwhelming and intimidating to step into the conversation for fear of just saying the wrong thing, or, not at first approaching these problems in the right way. Do you have any advice?
I think for someone who has never been directly impacted by the negative indicators that a lot of the vulnerable communities in which Philadelphia faces, I think the best thing you can do, 1, is learn. 2, listen. 3, it's okay to be wrong. You don't have to do everything with perfection. Don't be afraid of not only the issue, but of the people. You can't be everybody's best friend. You don't need to be everybody's best friend, but just take a step back and just see what's happening, and see even how you may contribute in a negative way. I work with, I figure out how to say this without telling on people. I've been in meetings where the only straight, white, with privilege male does all the talking. Shut up. And listen. That's a start. One of the things that I continue to do that continues to grow me as an individual is I read and I listen to podcasts like this one. And I do stuff every day that opens me up to something different that I may not have seen before, I may not have been exposed to before. And I think when you are in, and this goes to anyone of any race who has a level of privilege that comes with wealth and education, and or education, we get really comfortable in our lanes, and it gets really easy to put on blinders, and just to go this day to day and not realize I've spent the last 3 weeks in rooms with only people that look like me, and I think that's part of it. If there have been so many times where I've been the one and the only in a room, either the only woman or the only person of color. And that in and of itself is stressful and violent. But imagine that a world where, or even a community where you can have diversity in its truest sense and inclusion in its truest sense, and seek spaces where you're not a monolith. Seek spaces where you can learn from others and be around folks just by observing and just being comfortable. Find out where there are different communities. Might be having dinner in West Philly once a month, or someplace just be someplace different that is out of your routine, that exposes you to new and different people.
Yeah. So I have a few questions that I ask all of my guests.
Okay.
And so we've probably already touched upon this, but what is the biggest challenge facing Philadelphia today?
I think it's our poverty rate. I think it is. I think it is creating viable, sustaining, purpose-filled opportunities for all people. I think our language is moving away from, and kind of the sector of folks that are working in reform and social justice. Our language is moving, I think, away from getting people jobs. It's great to have a job, but what happens when a person has a career? How do we support young entrepreneurs or folks getting a first chance, not even a second chance, a first chance on life? And starting out a business and becoming what they were intended to be. It's great that Starbucks wants to give people 100,000 jobs, but how do they end up in the corporate boardroom?
So on the flip side, what's the most encouraging thing you see in Philadelphia today?
Our advocacy community. There are some really strong and even young voices that are really pushing and advocating for change. Even in philanthropy, like you have the Philadelphia Student Union, you have Helen Gim and City Council, you have Bread and Roses Foundation, you have Leeway Foundation, you have Black Lives Matter Philly. You have a lot of really great organizations that are on the ground doing good work, that are focused on justice and equity, that are upending kind of systems that have been in place, or at least exposing things that have been in place that have done harm, or providing opportunities to those who could do good.
For more on Erica, you can head over to podphillyhood.com/Atwood. That's ATWOOD. You can follow Erica on Twitter and Instagram at Erica in Philly, and her consulting firm is located at firstdegreellc.com. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating. If you have any feedback or ideas for the show, you can hit us up on Instagram and Twitter at PodPhillyWho, or you can email podphillywho@gmail.com. Music by Lee Rosevere, podcast art by Lauren Carhart. Special thanks to Erica for being a guest on the show. For Pod Philly Who, my name is Kevin Schmidlin. See you next week.